November 19, 2018. The courtroom in Weld County, Colorado, held its breath as Chris Watts stood before Judge Marcelo Kopkow. Just 4 months earlier, this same man had appeared on national television, his voice breaking as he pleaded for the safe return of his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. Now, television cameras captured a different image entirely. A monster in human skin, about to receive judgment for crimes so horrific that seasoned detectives wept during the investigation. 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 consecutive terms for murdering his wife Shanann and daughters Bella and Celeste. 2 additional sentences for unlawful termination of pregnancy and tampering with deceased bodies. The message was unmistakable. Chris Watts would die behind bars. Many believed he deserved execution, that lethal injection would be true justice, that keeping him alive was somehow merciful, an escape from what he truly deserved. But they were wrong. What Chris Watts faces in prison isn't mercy. It's something far more devastating than a quick death by needle. It's a living nightmare that stretches across decades, a punishment so psychologically brutal that it breaks the human mind in ways execution never could. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Chris Watts' sentence might be the cruelest form of justice the American legal system can deliver. But first, you need to understand where they sent him and why that decision changed everything. After sentencing, Colorado Department of Corrections faced a problem. Chris Watts was now the most hated man in the state. His face had been plastered across every news outlet. His interrogation videos had been watched millions of times online. Everyone knew what he'd done. Everyone knew his name. In prison culture, there exists an unwritten hierarchy. At the very bottom, lower than thieves, lower than gang members, lower than even violent offenders, sit the child killers. And Chris Watts hadn't just killed any children. He'd murdered his own daughters, little girls who called him daddy, who trusted him completely. Keeping him in Colorado was a death sentence. Not the legal kind, but the kind that happens in prison yards when guards look the other way. The kind that earns other inmates respect and status. So, they made a calculated decision. They transferred him out of state to Wisconsin, to a maximum security facility, the Dodge Correctional Institution, far from the media spotlight, away from the community that wanted him dead. But distance didn't save Chris Watts from anything. It simply transformed the nature of his torment. What awaited him in Wisconsin was something worse than violence. It was erasure, complete and total isolation from the human race. Let me show you what his life looks like now. Chris Watts wakes up every morning at approximately 5:30 a.m., not because he wants to, not because an alarm goes off, but because the fluorescent lights in his cell automatically illuminate, flooding his concrete box with harsh, artificial brightness. The cell measures 6 feet by 9 feet, 54 square feet, smaller than a parking space. The walls are cinder block painted institutional beige. The floor is smooth concrete, cold and unforgiving. There's a steel frame bed bolted to the wall with a thin mattress that's been compressed by thousands of bodies before his. A stainless steel toilet sits inches from where he sleeps. No privacy screen, no curtain, just exposed plumbing and the constant echo of flushing from neighboring cells. A small steel sink provides lukewarm water. A narrow window, if you can call it that, sits high on the wall, reinforced glass with wire mesh, offering a slice of sky, but no view of the world beyond. This 54-square-foot box is Chris Watts' entire universe. 23 hours every day, he remains locked inside. Think about that number for a moment. 23 hours. That leaves 1 hour 60 minutes for recreation. But even that hour isn't freedom. He's escorted alone to another confined space, a slightly larger cage, still surrounded by concrete and fence. No contact with other inmates, no conversations, no basketball games or weightlifting or card games like you see in movies. Just Chris Watts, alone, pacing in circles against the overwhelming silence. This isn't standard prison life. This is administrative segregation. Some call it protective custody. Others use the more honest term, solitary confinement. And solitary confinement does something terrifying to the human brain. Neuroscientists who study prolonged isolation have documented what happens to prisoners in solitary. The effects are measurable and devastating. Within weeks, prisoners begin experiencing hallucinations. They see shadows moving in their peripheral vision. They hear voices that aren't there. Their circadian rhythms collapse. Time becomes meaningless, unable to tell if minutes or hours have passed. Within months, cognitive function begins to deteriorate. Memory problems develop. Concentration becomes nearly impossible. Depression settles in like fog, thick and suffocating, making even simple thoughts feel exhausting. Within years, some prisoners describe feeling like they're losing their grip on reality itself. They talk to themselves constantly, creating imaginary companions just to hear conversation. They develop obsessive behaviors, counting ceiling tiles over and over, walking exact patterns on the floor, creating elaborate rituals to mark the passage of time. The human brain evolved for social connection. We're wired for interaction, for communication, for the simple presence of other human beings. Remove that, and the mind begins to cannibalize itself. Chris Watts has been living in these conditions since 2018. That's over 7 years of near-total isolation. 7 years of his brain slowly rewiring itself in the absence of normal human contact. Studies suggest that prisoners in long-term solitary often experience permanent psychological damage. Even if released, they struggle with anxiety, paranoia, and inability to function in social situations. Their brains have fundamentally changed. But Chris Watts will never be released. So, the deterioration continues, year after year, with no intervention that can fully restore what's being lost. And the isolation is only the beginning of his punishment. Here's what makes Chris Watts' sentence uniquely devastating. There's no endpoint except death. Most prisoners survive by holding on to hope. Maybe they'll earn parole after 15 years. Maybe their sentence will be commuted. Maybe they'll be transferred to a lower security facility with better conditions. Or maybe an appeal will succeed. These tiny possibilities, however slim, give them something to work toward. A reason to wake up each morning. Chris Watts has none of these lifelines. 5 life sentences without parole means exactly what it says. No possibility. Not slim chances. Not unlikely odds. 0. Nothing. The future is already written, and it ends the same way no matter what he does. He could become a model prisoner, could complete every available program, could spend the next 40 years helping other inmates, expressing remorse, cooperating with authorities. None of it matters. None of it changes anything. This absence of hope is its own form of torture that execution can't replicate. When someone receives the death penalty, there's an end date. However terrible, however frightening, it's finite. 15 years of appeals, then it's over. The suffering has boundaries. Chris Watts faces something without boundaries. 40 more years, 50 more years, decades of waking up in the same cell, seeing the same walls, living the same empty day on infinite repeat. Psychologists call this existential death, the complete destruction of any meaningful future. You're alive, but your life has already ended. You're breathing, but you're not living. Every morning is a reminder that yesterday's suffering will be repeated today, and tomorrow, and the day after that, forever. But even this psychological torment isn't the worst part of his existence. Chris Watts isn't just another prisoner. He can't blend into the background, can't become anonymous. He's Chris Watts, the family annihilator, the man who strangled his pregnant wife with his bare hands, the man who smothered his 4-year-old daughter, Bella, while her 3-year-old sister, Celeste, waited nearby, not knowing she'd be next. The man who drove those little girls' bodies to an oil site and dumped them in crude oil tanks. His case became one of the most publicized crimes of the decade. Every major news outlet covered it. His interrogation footage has been viewed over 100 million times online. There were books, podcasts, countless YouTube videos analyze every detail of his crimes. Then, in 2020, Netflix released American Murder, The Family Next Door. The documentary was watched by millions of people worldwide. It featured body camera footage from the initial investigation, text messages between Chris and Shanann, and social media posts from before the murders. It made the case impossible to forget. This means Chris Watts' infamy doesn't fade. It gets refreshed constantly. People who weren't even aware of the case in 2018 discover it now. Inside prison, this notoriety makes him the lowest of the low. Every guard who escorts him knows who he is. Every administrator who processes his paperwork knows what he did. Even prisoners in other sections who never see him know his name. And in prison culture, child killers occupy the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. They're considered subhuman, less than rats. Other inmates believe that certain crimes are so unforgivable that even among criminals, there must be a moral line. Chris Watts crossed every line. Chris Watts receives mail in prison. Hundreds of letters every year. They're not messages of support. They're letters filled with rage, with disgust, with detailed descriptions of what the writers hope will happen to him. Some come from parents who look at their own children and cannot fathom how anyone could do what he did. Others come from people who followed the case obsessively and need him to know that the world hasn't forgotten. Some letters include printed photographs of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, reminders of the lives he destroyed, reminders that his victims were real people with smiles and laughter and futures. Others are more disturbing, violent fantasies written by people who believe vigilante justice would be appropriate. Every piece of mail is screened by prison officials, but they still deliver much of it to his cell. So Chris Watts sits on his thin mattress and reads letter after letter, telling him he deserves to suffer, that he deserves worse than death, that his existence is a waste of oxygen. In prison, he has no escape. The hatred reaches him, surrounds him, reminds him daily that he will never be forgiven, that his name will forever be synonymous with evil. And this public contempt creates a constant, very real danger. Even in protective custody, Chris Watts lives with the knowledge that violence could reach him at any moment. Prison security isn't perfect. Guards can be bribed. Protocols can fail. Transfers can go wrong. A door can be left unlocked at the wrong time. A paperwork error can place him in contact with the general population of inmates. And if any prisoner gets access to Chris Watts, many would kill him without hesitation. Why? Because in the twisted moral code of prison culture, killing a child murderer makes you a hero. Other inmates celebrate it. You earn respect, status, protection. This means Chris Watts isn't just isolated, he's hunted. Theoretically hunted, but hunted nonetheless. Every unusual sound outside his cell could signal danger. Every change in routine could be a mistake that gives someone an opportunity. Every new guard could be the one who looks the other way. Imagine living like that. Not for a week, not for a year, but for decades. The psychological toll of constant hypervigilance is immeasurable. Your nervous system never fully relaxes. You can't sleep deeply because part of your brain must always remain alert. Adrenaline becomes your baseline state. Some prisoners in protective custody describe feeling like prey animals, always watching, always listening, always calculating escape routes that don't exist. This is Chris Watts' reality. Today, tomorrow, for the rest of his life. But while he lives in fear behind concrete walls, there are people outside who live with a different kind of pain, one that never diminishes. Shanann Watts' family wakes up every morning with an empty space that can never be filled. Her parents, Frank and Sandra Rzucek, lost their daughter and both granddaughters in a single night. Bella would be 13 now. Celeste would be 11. They'd be in middle school, playing sports, giggling with friends, planning their futures. Instead, there are empty bedrooms, birthday cakes that will never be baked, Christmas presents that will never be wrapped. Shanann's brother Frankie lost his sister and nieces. The extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all carry the trauma of these murders. Friends who knew Shanann describe the loss as a wound that never heals. And Chris Watts knows this. He knows that while he sits in his cell, The people who loved Shanann, Bella, and Celeste are still suffering. He knows he destroyed a family. He knows he robbed those little girls of every birthday, every graduation, every moment they should have had. The weight of that knowledge is inescapable. He cannot undo what he did, cannot bring them back, cannot make amends, cannot apologize enough. All he can do is exist with the full awareness that he's responsible for permanent, irreversible destruction. And what he revealed in a prison interview shows just how calculated his actions truly were. He described the morning in chilling detail, how he told Shanann he wanted to separate, how an argument escalated. According to his initial story, he claimed Shanann killed the girls, and he killed her in rage. But investigators knew he was lying. The evidence didn't match, and eventually, Chris Watts told a different story. The truth was worse. He admitted that he killed Shanann first, strangled her in their bedroom while she pleaded for her life. Then he loaded her body into his work truck, went upstairs, and woke up Bella and Celeste, told them they were going for a ride. Bella asked, "Is Mommy sick?" Because Shanann had been feeling ill from pregnancy. He drove 45 minutes to a remote oil site. His daughters sat in the back seat while their mother's body lay in the truck bed. At the site, he took Celeste first, smothered her. Then Bella, who had seen what happened to her sister, fought back. 4 years old, and she fought for her life. He smothered her anyway. Then he stuffed their small bodies into crude oil tanks and buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. These weren't the actions of someone who snapped. This was a series of calculated choices. He had multiple opportunities to stop, to turn around, to call for help. Instead, he kept going. And now he sits in his cell with these memories. Whether his remorse is genuine or not, the memories remain. They replay in his mind. The sound of Shanann's voice, the look in Bella's eyes, the weight of their bodies. Unlike someone facing execution, Chris Watts will carry these memories for potentially 50 more years, half a century of reliving the worst moments of his life. Is life in prison without parole better or worse than the death penalty? Throughout this story, I've shown you the reality of Chris Watts's existence. The 6x9 cell, the 23 hours of daily isolation, the psychological deterioration, the public hatred, the constant threat of violence, the complete absence of hope. Those who support the death penalty argue it provides closure, justice. They believe monsters like Chris Watts don't deserve to keep breathing. That execution is society's ultimate statement. You are too dangerous and too evil to exist. But others argue that life in prison is actually the harsher sentence, that death is mercy, an escape, a relief. Execution ends suffering. Life in a concrete box with no future, no hope, and constant psychological torment, that's the real punishment. Chris Watts faces his crimes every single morning, every night, every moment in between. He doesn't get the release of death. He doesn't get to escape into non-existence. He has to live with what he did for 40 or 50 more years. So, which is worse? Chris Watts isn't just another prisoner. He can't blend into the background, can't become anonymous. He's Chris Watts, the family annihilator, the man who strangled his pregnant wife with his bare hands, the man who smothered his 4-year-old daughter, Bella, while her 3-year-old sister, Celeste, waited nearby, not knowing she'd be next. The man who drove those little girls' bodies to an oil site and dumped them in crude oil tanks. His case became one of the most publicized crimes of the decade. This is the daily reality inside prison for one of the most infamous family killers in America. For Chris Watts, each day is a silent reminder of what he did. Some say his existence is a punishment far worse than death itself. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Chris Watts' life behind bars is enough? Or should justice have taken another path? Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like the video and subscribe for more videos like this.